Thanks for clicking. So Scholar paid 2 million to find mistakes in Quran and shocked by what he found. Wow, that's a whole lot, guys. Let's check it out.
This is Professor Marin van Putten, who received a whopping 2 million euros grant by the European Research Council to linguistically take apart the Quran and figure out whether it lives up to its extraordinary claims as a perfectly preserved book originating in the middle of the 7th century. Before we get to what his analysis revealed, it's worth quickly going over the standard Muslim timeline. This gives us a frame of reference to compare the professor's scholarship against. In 610 CE, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ receives his first revelation. In 632 CE, the Prophet ﷺ passes away and all revelation ceases. By now, the Quran has been entirely memorized and inscribed on various perishable material. In 632 CE, from various written material and men's hearts, Caliph Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu gathers the Quran into a single book, Mus'haf. Note, the Prophet died this very same year. On the 25th year of the Hijrah, 647 CE, Uthman radiallahu anhu standardizes the Quran back to Qurayshi dialect throughout the Muslim lands. The period between the Prophet ﷺ death and standardization of Quran is about 15 years. Now, bear this in mind. This is the crux. According to the Muslim sources, the Quran was standardized by about 647 CE by the third Caliph, Uthman radiallahu anhu. And it is this claim that's being tested today. Now, one last important thing before we get to the professor's remarkable findings. What does standardization actually mean? Well, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ to the third Caliph, Uthman radiallahu anhu, a 15-year period, the Quran could be recited in 7 Arabic dialects called ahruf. Now, this doesn't mean 7 different Qurans. It means the 7 readings of the Quran are the same, but there are minute dialectical differences in how certain words are pronounced and spelt. This flexibility existed to assist the non-Quraysh Arabs with their recitation. What's important to remember is these 7 readings are mentioned in authentic ahadith, and so they're a part of the canonical readings of the Quran. They're not corruptions, and they certainly don't impact the theology. So the standardization process was basically Caliph Uthman radiallahu anhu restoring the Quranic recitation back to the main Qurayshi dialect, always the most popular one that the Quran was originally revealed in. Why? Because by about 647 CE, the different Arabic dialects were starting to confuse the new Muslims joining the growing caliphate. Now to our academic, a leader in the field of historical linguistics, who specializes in the linguistic history of Arabic, Berber and Semitic. Marin van Putten, PhD 2013 of Leiden University, who focuses his research on the textual history of the Quran and the early history of the Quranic reading traditions. For your information, he's not a Muslim, and his only motivation is to subject the earliest Quran manuscripts to the historical critical method. So, the 2 million euro question. Has the Quran been faithfully preserved? Because that's the bold claim Islam makes, right? Quote, verily, it is we who have sent down the dhikr, and surely we will guard it from corruption.
For this, but if you look at the text, really look at the text and look at the early manuscripts, not many people are looking at them. The first thing that will strike you is that how similar they are. They are extremely similar. I mean, it's really a totally different story than with the New Testament, but even with like early Hebrew Bible stuff, it's much more chaotic.
You can sense the surprise in the professor's voice, can't you? In terms of what he's encountered with these manuscripts. It was clearly a surprise. By way of comparison, he mentions the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, but it's clear the Quran is in a league of its own.
And then you look at the Quran, and it's the same thing over and over again. It's not just the same thing, like in general lines. No, it's down, not just down to the words, it's down to the spellings, right? Even the specific spellings. And sometimes really random spellings are copied faithfully over and over again. Sometimes a word can be spelled in two ways, but they'll always write in one place in one way and the other place in another way, and you don't get any mixing in that early manuscript. So really, scribes took the utmost care to really carefully copy these manuscripts.
The professor is so taken aback by the level of meticulous attention to the process of preservation he observed in these early manuscripts. He grudgingly juggles the idea of the early Muslims doing something extraordinarily anachronistic, like a postmodern interfaith textual critique, something unheard of until the post-Enlightenment landscape of modern academia.
It's like, well, is that because of an example of the text? I don't know. That is putting a lot of faith in knowledge of textual problems in the person whoever composed the Quran, which they may have, but how aware were people of these issues?
Now, obviously, being an academic, working within the framework of the historical method, he can't attribute this perfect preservation to a god, no matter the extraordinary things he stumbles upon exploring the Quran. He has to confine his answer to an academic one. That's what he gets paid millions for. Theology just doesn't figure, I'm afraid.
But the Quran does take pains to say, look, this text is in some way protected from corruption, and these previous texts were corrupted. So I think that was a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. If the Quran says it has to be preserved, and it will be preserved. Yeah, obviously, followers are going to try really hard to do so, and they do. I mean, they're actually very successful at it.
So now that we know that he has found the Quran to be faithfully transmitted between the earliest scribes, does he also find the earliest manuscripts go back to the Uthmanic recension when, according to the Muslim sources, it was standardized?
And then the question kind of becomes, okay, so when was this text standardized? We have an early standard text, and so just to be clear, we have hundreds of manuscripts, and every single one of them are part of this same text type, the standard text, except for one, which we'll get to in a second as well, but I'll repeat it here as well. But all of them are the same text type, and all of them are, letter by letter, basically identical. Small changes here and there, of course, like it would always be, but it's really, really carefully controlled for. Which suggests there was a common ancestor. So there was a single written text. People were not, hearing the Quran recited and writing down what they heard. No. They had a written copy, and that copy was distributed across the empire, and that was copied and copied and copied extremely carefully to the point that, there's barely any differences there. The text is identical.
So the fact there are hundreds of manuscripts of the same text type, quote, identical letter by letter, suggests to him there was a common ancestor, a master text. He uses an interesting choice of words here. Quote, they had a written copy, and that copy was distributed across the empire, and that copy was copied and copied extremely carefully, so the texts are identical. The fascinating thing here is, frankly, the extraordinary thing, that's exactly the journey the Quran underwent according to the standard Muslim narrative. What do you know? Uthman radiallahu anhu standardized the text in 647 CE or thereabouts and distributed this master version throughout the empire, and then the master text was carefully copied thereafter. Subhanallah. So, we can safely say the professor does find the Quran to have been faithfully preserved. Now the professor will discuss when, as far as he can tell from the data, the standardization likely occurred. Remember, the Muslim sources claim it happened in about 647 CE during the Khilafah of Uthman radiallahu anhu. Keep this date in mind as we dive into the next clip.
We have radiocarbon dated manuscripts, and radiocarbon dated manuscripts give, dates of these manuscripts from, say, the late 7th century and mid 7th century, that kind of era. And we have multiple of those. Well, all of those descend from a single original text. So if they all descend from a single original text, that original text must have been even earlier, right? Because they've been copied from that. Which brings us very close to a date, say, around the 650s, and not much later than that. Earlier is technically possible, but we have yet to see real manuscripts that really fall out of line in a weird way. Around 650, which is perfectly in line with the traditional Muslim narrative about this, who say that Uthman, the third caliph, who reigned around the 650s, standardized the text and distributed it across the Islamic Empire. Well, that seems to be what we see. That really seems to be what happened. So,
Subhanallah. So Professor Marin van Putten is now explaining that the sheer number of identical texts, and the fact that they've all been radiocarbon dated to a period between 650 and 700 CE suggests they have a common ancestor text that goes back even further into history to no later than 650 or perhaps even slightly earlier. The numbers are important because if you have the one text carbon dated to 650 to 700, that might be an anomaly, right? But with hundreds returning the same date, it makes it more likely and reliable. Now, the fact that these hundreds of texts are near identical also suggests they couldn't have been written randomly or in isolation, say from memory. It signals they were handwritten, and there was also a scribal system in place ensuring standardization. Thirdly, if you have hundreds of identical texts in a period spanning 650 to 700, it suggests their master text must have existed prior to this period. Well, guess what? This places the standardization of the Quran remarkably at or just before 650 CE, which is almost precisely the same date to the year the Muslim sources, the ones that apparently aren't reliable, claim Uthman radiallahu anhu standardized the Quran in 647 CE. Wow. Just wow. Subhanallah. That is a remarkable overlap between the Muslim claim and modern scholarship. It truly is. Let's get something straight before we finish. The European Research Council is a secular body, governed by a scientific council and funded at a cost of 16 billion euros by some of the most liberal nations in the world in Western Europe. Its president is Maria Leptin, herself a molecular biologist. Ideologically, their mission is antithetical to religion, but they're going to be more averse to Islam because inside their paradigm, Islam is the least reformed and most in need of intellectual scrutiny. They don't exist to do any favors for religion. Let's not beat around the bush. Frankly, to them, the world is a better place without such superstition. So this organization, part of the European Commission, headquartered in Brussels, paying out millions of euros to intelligent people like our star linguist, Marin van Putten, is coming with the assumption that science is the solution for pretty much every problem going. And baked into this bias is the additional assumption that if enough clever people subject any religion to enough specialist scrutiny, that religion falls apart and is inevitably proven a man-made enterprise. So, when the opposite happens, and a 300-year strategy for science to take over the world is upended, and religion is shown in a positive light or somehow confirmed by a secular critical study, despite the vast amounts of cash and resources being thrown at it, you know for sure there was just too much incontrovertible evidence on the side of religion, in this case Islam, to warrant the findings the study concluded with. And what were these findings? The Islamic sources are reliable when it comes to the Quranic narrative. The Quran was faithfully preserved. And the Uthmanic Codex does indeed go back to Caliph Uthman, who standardized the text in about 647 CE. Thank you for watching.
Some people like to take challenges though. People like to challenge themselves or accept challenges because I don't know, why would the man think there will be mistake in the Quran? Why will you think that? I don't know why. He's a professor, so professors like to challenge themselves. They like to go deep into research to know about religion, especially if they hear things that they might be thinking, oh, okay, let me challenge myself, because of the fact that they've always been saying that, okay, there's no mistake in the Quran, there's mistake in the Bible. I've read a particular video like that person said there's mistake in the Bible, but there's never a mistake in the Quran. And there's also a video that I heard that somebody made mention on the fact that there was some kind of errors in the Quran. Like, even though people think it's a mistake, it can't be called a mistake, because anything that happens in the Bible or in the Quran, it is due to the incident that happened. So human eye, it might look like a mistake, but during that time, that is what really happened, and that is the experience. You get it? So this was really beautiful to watch. I just enjoyed the whole interaction, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.